Next is Paradise Found, The Cradle of the Human Race at the North Pole by William Warren, Book 3, Chapter 2. The Testimony of Astronomical Geography. We are apt to think of an unbroken night of 6 months at the pole. Eminent scientific authorities speak as if this conception were correct. Thus, Professor Geikie, in his admirable new manual of geology, writing of the Arctic flora of the Miocene Age, says, when we remember that this vegetation grew luxuriantly within 8 degrees 15 minutes of the North Pole in a region which is in darkness for half of the year, we can realize the difficulty of the problem in the distribution of climate which these facts present to the geologists. In like manner, Charles Lyell, discussing the question of the possibility of whales reaching the supposed open sea at the pole, says, they could pass under considerable barriers of ice, provided there were openings here and there, and so they may perhaps reach a more open sea near the pole and find sustenance there during a day of more than 5 months' duration. From such representations as these, the reader naturally carries away the impression that daylight lasts at the pole somewhat over 5 months, while all the rest of the year the region is shrouded in darkness. Were this true, it would certainly be an unpromising region in which to search for the terrestrial paradise. Fortunately for our hypothesis, this conception of the duration of the polar night is very far from true. The half-year reign of darkness exists only in the uninstructed imagination. Astronomical geography teaches that, as respects daylight, the polar regions are and always have been the most favored portions of the globe. As early a popularizer of natural science as the Reverend Thomas Dick set forth the real facts as follows. Under the poles, quote, where the darkness of night would continue 6 months without intermission, if there were no refraction, total darkness does not prevail 1/2 of this period. When the sun sets at the North Pole, about the 23rd of September, the inhabitants, if any, enjoy a perpetual aurora till he has descended 18 degrees below the horizon. In his course through the ecliptic, the sun is 2 months before he can reach this point, during which time there is a perpetual twilight. In 2 months more, he arrives again at the same point, namely 18 degrees below the horizon, when a new twilight commences, which is continually increasing in brilliancy for another 2 months, at the end of which the body of this luminary is seen rising in all its glory. So that, in this region, the light of day is enjoyed in a greater or less degree for 10 months without interruption by the effects of atmospheric refraction. And during the 2 months, when the influence of the solar light is entirely withdrawn, the moon is shining above the horizon for 2.5 months without intermission. And thus it happens that no more than 2 separate fortnights are passed in total darkness. And this darkness is alleviated by the light of the stars and the frequent coruscations of the aurora borealis. Hence, it appears that there are no portions of our globe which enjoy throughout the year so large a portion of the solar light as these northern regions. Striking as is this account of the polar day, it is noteworthy to experience has repeatedly shown that the actual duration of light in high latitudes exceeds even the calculations of the astronomers. Thus, in the spring of 1873, the officers of the Austrian expedition, under Lieutenants Weyprecht and Peyer, were surprised to behold the sun 3 days before the date on which he was expected to rise. A later writer thus states the case: in the latitude 79 degrees 15 minutes north, in which the Tegethoff was lying, the sun ought to reappear above the horizon on the 19th of February, but owing to an effect of refraction, due to the low temperature prevailing, minus 30 degrees, the explorers were able to salute its rays 3 days earlier. Lieutenant Payer's own account is as follows, quote, though the sun did not return to our latitude 78 degrees 15 minutes north, 71 degrees 38 minutes east longitude, till the 19th of February, we were able to greet his beams 3 days previous to that date, owing to the strong refraction of 1 degree 40 minutes, which accompanied a temperature of minus 30 degrees. Still more remarkable was the experience of Barentz's Arctic expedition almost 300 years ago. Dr. Dick alludes to it as follows, quote, the refractive power of the atmosphere has been found to be much greater in certain cases than what has now been stated. In the year 1595, a company of Dutch sailors, having been wrecked on the shores of Novaya Zemlya, and having been obliged to remain in that desolate region during a night of more than 3 months, it was a little less than 3 months, beheld the sun make his appearance in the horizon about 16 days before the time in which he should have risen, according to calculation, and when his body was actually more than 4 degrees below the horizon. The only explanation of this astonishing phenomenon, which the same writer offers, is found in this appended clause, quote, which circumstance has been attributed to the great refractive power of the atmosphere in those intensely cold regions, unquote. This is so unsatisfactory that not a few prefer to believe what seems entirely incredible, namely, that Barentz and his men, in the short space of less than 3 months, made a blunder of 16 days in their time record. Professor Nordenskjöld has already referred to the case as follows, quote, on the 14th of November, the sun disappeared and was again visible on the 14th of February. These dates have caused scientific men much perplexity because in latitude 76 degrees north, the upper edge of the sun ought to have ceased to be visible when the sun's south declination in autumn became greater than 13 degrees, and to have become visible again when the declination again became less than that figure. That is to say, the sun ought to have been seen for the last time at Barents Ice Haven on the 16th of October, and it ought to have appeared again there on the 14th of February. It has been supposed that the deviation arose from a considerable error in counting the days, but this was unanimously denied by the crew who wintered. In a footnote, he gives proofs which seem convincing that no such error can have been committed. But while these experiences of Barents and the Austrians point to a duration of darkness at the pole of less than 60 days out of the 365, some apparently good authorities extend the period to 76 or 77 days. Thus, Captain Bedford Pym of the Royal Navy of Great Britain makes the following statement, quote, on the 16th of March, the sun rises, preceded by a long dawn of 47 days, namely from the 29th of January, when the first glimmer of light appears. On the 25th of September, the sun sets, and after a twilight of 48 days, namely on the 13th of November, darkness reigns supreme, so far as the sun is concerned, for 76 days, followed by one long period of light, the sun remaining above the horizon 194 days. The year, therefore, is thus divided at the pole: 194 days of sun 76 days of darkness, 47 days of dawn, and 48 days of twilight. Even according to this account, we should have at the pole only 76 days of darkness to 289 days of light in the year. In other words, instead of being in darkness little short of half the time, as at the equator, one would be in darkness but 1/4 of the time. As far as light is concerned, therefore, even on this calculation, the polar region is twice as favorable to life as any equatorial region that can be named. But whence this discrepancy among the astronomers? Why should some of them make the polar night 16 days longer than others? The simple answer is that they proceed upon different assumptions as to the atmospheric refraction in the region of the pole. In our latitude, twilight is usually reckoned to begin when the center of the rising sun is yet 18 degrees below the horizon. Starting with this as the limit, and counting sunrise and sunset to be the moments when the sun's upper limb is on the horizon, we arrive at the division of the polar year given by Captain Pym. But astronomers say that in England, twilight has been observed when the sun was 21 degrees below the horizon. To be entirely safe, some have therefore taken 20 degrees as the limit of solar depression, and reckoning with this datum, instead of the 18 degrees before mentioned, have found that at the pole, the morning twilight would begin January 20th, and the evening twilight would cease November 21st. This would make the period of darkness but 16 days, and the period of light 305. Thus, a difference of only 2 degrees in the assumed limit of solar depression at the beginning and end of the twilight makes the difference of 16 days in the supposed duration of darkness. Which of the two calculations, writes an eminent American mathematician, is the more correct is known, I imagine, by no one. To us, in the present discussion, the discrepancy is a very little moment. It is only a question as to whether at the pole there is daylight 3/4 or 5/6 of the year. Both suppositions may be and probably are wrong, but if in tropical climates 16 or 17 degrees is said to be sufficient allowance for the extreme solar depression, while on the other hand it is said in England to vary from 17 degrees to 21 degrees, it certainly looks as though in yet higher latitudes the light of the sun might be discernible when its body is as much as 21 or 22 degrees below the horizon, and this would reduce the annual polar darkness to less than 50 days. This supposition is rendered the more probable by the fact that, while the expeditions already alluded to found much more of daylight than their astronomical calculations had led them to expect, we have no offsetting accounts where the sun was awaited in vain. The final and authoritative settlement of the question can be reached only by actual observation. Among the fascinating problems whose solution awaits the progress of Arctic exploration, we must therefore place the scientific determination of the unknown duration of the polar day. In view of the foregoing, we are certainly safe in conceiving of the polar night as lasting not over 4 fortnights. During 2 of these, as Dick reminds us, the moon would be walking in beauty through the heavens and exhibiting all her changing phases of loveliness in unbroken successions. The other 2 would be passed beneath the starry arch of heaven, all of whose sparkling constellations would be moving around and around the observer in exactly horizontal orbits. In such a perfect and regular stellar system, kept in view so long and so continuously, the irregular movements of the planets or wandering stars could not possibly escape observation. All their curious accelerations, retardations, conjunctions, declinations would be perfectly marked and measured on the revolving but changeless dial plate of the remoter sky. Dwelling in such a natural observatory, any people would of necessity become astronomers. And how magnificent and orderly would the ongoings of the universe appear when viewed from underneath a firmament whose center of revolution was fixed in the observer's zenith? After long months of unbroken daylight, how would one's soul yearn for a new vision of those stellar glories of the night? Nor would the moon and silent stars be the only attractions of the brief period during which the light of the sun was withdrawn. The mystic play of the northern light would transform the familiar daylight world into a veritable fairyland. In our latitude, the aurora borealis is a comparatively rare and tame phenomenon. In the highest Arctic regions, it is almost nightly kindles its unearthly glories. In itself, it is lightning diluted and sublimated to the point of harmlessness. Sometimes these electric discharges not only fill the whole heaven with palpitating draperies, but also tip the hills with lambent flame, and cause the very soil on which one stands to prickle with a kind of life. But after all the glories of the night begin the greater glories of the polar day. Who, with any approach to adequacy, has ever described a dawn? What poet has not attempted it, and what poet has not failed? But if it be impossible to picture one of our brief and evanescent day dawns, then who shall attempt a description of that surpassing spectacle in which all the splendors and loveliness of 60 of our dawns are combined into one? No words can ever portray it. No poet's imagination even has ever given us such unearthly scenery. First of all, appears low in the horizon of the night sky a scarcely visible flush of light. At first, it only makes a few stars' light seem a trifle fainter, but after a while, it is seen to be increasing and to be moving laterally along the yet dark horizon. 24 hours later, it has made a complete circuit around the observer and is causing a larger number of stars to pale. Soon, the widening light glows with the luster of orient pearl. Onward it moves in its stately rounds until the pearly whiteness burns into ruddy rose light, fringed with purple and gold. Day after day, as we measure days, this splendid panorama circles on, and, according as atmospheric conditions and clouds present more or less favorable conditions of reflection, kindles and fades, fades only to kindle next time yet more brightly, as the still hidden sun comes nearer and nearer his point of emergence. At length, when for 2 long months such prophetic displays have been filling the whole heavens with this increasant and revolving splendors, the sun begins to emerge from his long retirement and to display himself once more to human vision. After 1 or 2 circuits, during which his dazzling upper limb grows to a full-orbed disk, he clears all hilltops of the distant horizon and for 6 full months circles around and around the world's great axis in full view, suffering no night to fall upon his favored homeland at the pole. Even when at last he sinks again from view, he covers his retreat with a repetition of the deepening and fading splendors which filled his long dawning. And if in these pulses of more and more distant light he were signaling back to the forsaken world the promises and prophecies of an early return. In these prosaic sentences, we aim at no description of the indescribable. We only remind ourselves of the bald facts and conditions which govern the unpicturable transformations of each year-long polar night and day. Enough, however, has been said for our purpose. Whoever seeks as a probable location for paradise, the heavenliest spot on earth, with respect to light and darkness, and with respect to celestial scenery, must be content to seek it at the Arctic pole. Here is the true city of the sun. Here is the one and only spot on earth respecting which it would seem as if the Creator had said, as of his own heavenly residence, there shall be no night.